to everything. So, and I promise you we will finish on time despite the delay. So these are the outcomes of today's session. I want you to be really clear when you leave this today about the process, about the requirements from the case study and the assessment questions, how it will be marked, the issues of using AI. So I'm just going to show you some examples of that. And we're going to have a look at a couple of responses. You're going to just have a read of them and see what you think of them. And then I'll give you some of my views on them as well. So just to remind you, you'll have had this probably in your last session or you're about to have it, but you have to demonstrate at least 90% engagement to be able to go forward for assessment. So that just means that you've attended everything. If you've missed any face-to-face sessions or online sessions, you've caught up with the video that's been provided or the task that's been provided, that you've had your mentor meetings, and all of that counts towards your 90%. That's dealt with by your delivery partner. So if you've got any issues with that, you need to contact them. But basically, if you don't hear anything, it's probably because you're reaching that 90% and there's nothing to worry about. We tend to focus on the ones where we've got concerns. The summative assessment itself is responding to a leadership case study. So I'm going to take you through that. You've got 8 calendar days to do that. And it takes about 9 to 10 hours. That's what the test ones have shown. It's about 9 to 10 hours to do it from start to finish. The actual summative assessment process isn't managed by UCL. It's managed by a company called MPQ Online. So again, I'll explain that as we go through. And then the dates for your writing window, sorry, that should say the leadership programs. I've forgotten to change that heading. It's my fault. But yours opens on the 10th of September, which is a Wednesday, and it closes on the 18th of September. So it's noon to noon, and I'll talk you through uploading and that kind of thing later. And you should get your results by about the 16th of December. So the timings are, we've got this 8-day window. After that, it takes us as assessors about 3 weeks to mark them. So we get about 10 days to mark, and then there's an internal moderation process of about a week as well. It then goes to external moderation for 6 weeks, and you'll get the results after 3 months. Any appeals are dealt with outside of that 3-month window. And if you fail, you do get an opportunity to do it again in the next window with a completely different case study. So you'll go with the next cohort and go to assessment with them. So there is another opportunity. So what happens in the process is, once you've done your 90% engagement, your delivery partner inform UCL, and UCL start to release those names in batches, because as you can appreciate, it's thousands. So they'll release them in batches to MPQ Online, who will then contact you to provide you with login details for their assessment platform. So it's not on UCL Extend at that point. The assessment platform is separate. You still have access to UCL Extend though. The assessment window starts at 12 noon. And at that point, the MPQ office, the MPQ Online office will be staffed to give you support. So if you've got problems with things like logging in, that it's MPQ Online that you need to contact, because we don't have access to that system. When you are given your access, and you might get that at a different time to somebody else on your course, you shouldn't worry about that. It's just that, as I said, they all go through in batches because of the number of participants. But when you've got your login, give it a go, log in, and there's an opportunity to do a test download. So you can download something and upload it to test that that works. When the actual, you can do that before the window, just before, but when the actual window is open, you download your case study and your submission template and your instructions and save those into a user area somewhere. You'll already have your MPQ framework, which is in your participant handbooks, but that's available on the DFE website as well. If you just do a Google search for your MPQ, so MPQSL DFE framework, you'll get the whole framework up, and I'm going to make reference to that later on in the presentation. And then before midday, at the end of the 8th day window, you need to upload your completed submission template, please make sure you give yourself plenty of time, because once that 12 noon deadline is passed, you can't be late. So it's like, submitting coursework at university or something. Once that's passed, there are no excuses. You can't submit it. So you need to make sure you give yourself plenty of time the day before or early that morning to make sure that you've got time to upload it. So it is an open book assessment. You've got 8 calendar days, takes about 10 hours depending on your personal style. Because it's open book, you are allowed to ask for advice. So people like your mentor, a colleague in school with leadership responsibilities, your head teacher. If you're already a head teacher, you could ask your CEO, you could ask other executive leaders. You are allowed to ask almost anybody. It's not appropriate to ask your course facilitator or your delivery partner, and it's not appropriate to ask people that are on your course because of the dangers of collusion and plagiarism there. So what happens is I assess on NPQSL particularly, and I will be sent the responses from one delivery partner, so that as I'm reading them, I might spot similarities, and I know then that people might have colluded in those responses. So my advice is, don't talk to anybody on your current course. You can talk to people that have done it previously, as long as they're not in your cohort. So don't be tempted to say, I'm struggling with question 4. Can I read your outline, or can I have a look at what you've written? Because you have to go into this kind of not trusting anybody with that, with what you've written. So don't ask for it, and if people ask, don't give it. So collusion is where you've got strikingly similar responses, and plagiarism is where you've got 5% of your script is copied from other sources. That includes other colleagues. You don't need to do any academic referencing. I'm going to show you some examples of how to write it later on, but you need to avoid over quoting things, because 5% of quotes is still, over 5% is still counted as plagiarism. So it needs to be put into your own words, and I'll show you examples of how you do that and explain that a bit further. So what we're trying to do with this assessment is test your learning from the programme. So we want to see that you've learned something from doing an NPQ, you've learned something from leadership in your own school, and how you've developed as a leader. We want to see that you have read and understood and responded directly to the issues that are provided about this case study in the 5 questions. We need to see that your response is relevant to the questions and to the case study, and you need to draw on your experience and learning to respond to those issues and bring in the taught elements of the course. If you write generically, without referring to the case study and without referring to things that you've learned from the course, then it will fail. If you just write any old stuff that's relevant to the question but not pinned to the case study, you will fail. So the case study is a real scenario but anonymised. It's something that's actually happened. It will be different to the last cohort, and we're testing those learn that and learn how to statements that are from the DFE framework and in your participant handbooks. Implementation is always tested, and we usually get 2 questions on implementation. The case study might be for a setting that you don't teach in or you don't lead in. So you might lead in a secondary school, and it might be a case study from a primary school. They've tested this out. It doesn't have any impact on your ability to answer the question well. It's about leadership, and it's about leading on an issue. It's not about your knowledge of maybe leading in a primary school particularly. So it will be general enough that you can answer it no matter what phase the question is and what phase you come from. So I've chosen an NPQH example here, but this is an example of what the case study might look like. If you go into the assessment folder, and we will show you this later on, but if you go into the assessment folder on your NPQ, you will find an example of a case study. So NPQH, I think it might still be Grant Hill Academy. So you'll get information about the school context. You've got here that there are 40 nationalities. when it was inspected, what their journey has been, whether they've become part of a multi-academy trust recently. You can see down here we've got data about school population, so you'll get lots of different kinds of information. For MPQH particularly and EL, you might get budget expenditure. You'll get things like extracts from Ofsted reports, from SIT visits. There might be quotes from teachers and other leaders in the school. So there's lots of information for you to draw on. Now, at the beginning of the pack will be this page. It's always exactly the same kind of page where you get the name of the school again, and then you'll get the 5 domains or the domain areas that you are being tested on. So this is a really useful table to help you plan. So you can see here we're being tested on curriculum assessment, additional needs, professional development, and twice on implementation. And then we've got a little bit more information on exactly what in there you are going to be assessed on. So what I'm going to do to start off with is show you how you can sort the wood from the trees, how you can get rid of stuff that you don't need and just strip down all the information you've got either in your online folders or in physical folders. So if I just go for this, I've just taken the front cover there. Again, it's the same domains that I'm using just to exemplify it. Although it's MPQH, it applies to all of the MPQs. So we're going to focus on these domain statements to start off with. In the DFE framework, they are numbered. So if you went onto the DFE framework, it would say Domain 3 Curriculum and Assessment. Ignore these letters. They're not for you. They're for assessors. They don't mean anything. They're not important. So you'll find them in the MPQ framework, and you'll see the contents page of the MPQ framework. You can see there they are numbered with their domain titles, and you can see here, for example, Domain 3 Curriculum and Assessment. It's just this one here. So they match, the case study matches the framework that's provided by the DFE. Your UCL modules, however, are done in a different order, because you'll see here that implementation planning is number 8, but actually the UCL course starts with implementation planning in module 1 because it's the thing that sets you up for the rest of the course. So your modules don't match in number to these. So your first job is to think about all of your modules. It's to look at the domain statements that you're being tested on, and it's to get rid of the ones that you're not being tested on. So for example, if we start with domain 3 and domain 1 is teaching, I'm just going to label them there. Sorry, domain 2 is teaching. You can see there, domain 3 is here in module 2, curriculum and assessment. I'm not being assessed on school culture. I'm not being assessed on domain 2, which is teaching. And I'm not being assessed in anything to do with module 3. So I can get rid of all of those out of my folder. So all I've then got is all of the stuff I've done, you know, all of the booklets and the work that you've done for 8, 6, 3, and 5. You can see here 3, 5, 6, and 8. They're all the modules that I need. So that's my top tip for getting yourself organised before you've even read the case study. Get rid of things that you don't need. You don't need to cross-reference any of those. We can then use this to help us to plan our responses. So what I'm going to do now is focus on then the domain statements that need to be addressed. And you'll find those domain statements in the curriculum framework. So I'm just going to focus on domain 3. So if I just go back, you've got these examples here, but I'm just going to focus on this one to exemplify the next stage. So for this question that's going to be on curriculum and assessment, all I need to know about is oversee the design and implementation of a sequence, broad and coherent curricula. So I need to find this in the curriculum framework so I know exactly what I'm being assessed on. And you'll see here it's in bold with exactly the same wording. So this statement down here, support colleagues to develop pupils' literacy by including, I don't need to look at that one. I only need to focus on these 4 statements here. And if you go to Domain 3 Curriculum and Assessment in your digest, you'll recognise the look of the front page of this. You'll see it in here as well. So under Curriculum, you'll see that statement. So what's in your Domain digest from UCL and from your delivery partner, whoops, matches exactly with these statements. So that now helps me see, that's my domain, this is my domain statement, and these are the 4 things that I'm going to have to make sure I get into that response. So I can start to unpick the question before I've even read the question. So if I now go over to your questions, these questions will be repeated on your online submission template so that you can just have them in front of you and you've not got to keep going back to the case study. And if I focus on Domain 3, which is the broad and coherent curriculum, it was our first statement, wasn't it, on that grid? And you can see here, we've got the question, and you'll see that the statement is repeated in the question, so you know that it matches up. So we've got implementation of a carefully sequenced, broad and coherent curriculum. So if I go back to that page, okay, it's the same thing. We've got those 4 statements and we just need to find it on here so that we know what we're being asked to do. This is how we then use this statement here, the question and all these must consider. They've changed the wording on this. It now says must consider. These are all of the things that you need to include. It's a summary of those 4 statements that I've just told you. So we can start to plan our response and figure out the mark scheme. So this is my top tip for the mark scheme. So here's oversee the curriculum and the 4 statements. Here's the question that you're being asked. So if I start to break that down, design the implementation of a carefully sequenced and broad curriculum, it's here. And then that's now changed to must. And then we've got these statements. So I know that I need to make sure I've got in there something about curriculum progression and sequencing, teacher and subject leader expertise, subject knowledge, skills and values, relationship between the national curriculum and your broader vision for learning. And then I've got these statements that match up to that. They're just in a bit more detail. So by using this and these, I can start to now figure out what I'm being assessed on. So that becomes my plan. So I know that I've got to have something about overseeing and the design and implementation of a curricula. I need to develop and value subject expertise of teachers and subject leaders. I know from reading a bit more in here that I need to build a collective understanding of inherent structures, concepts, knowledge and skills within subjects and share and reflect on that. I know that I need to ensure that the school's curriculum sets out knowledge, skills and values that the pupils will learn, and that it encompasses the national curriculum with my vision or the school's vision for successful learning. So that becomes my plan, and I guarantee you that is what is in the mark scheme. So that's how you figure out the mark scheme. If you hit all of these, you are much more likely to get the pass mark that you need on that question. So my advice following this session is to have a go at doing this. Go to the case study that you've got on UCL Extend and try and do exactly what I've done. Get the criteria, get the question, just write a bullet point list of what you think you're being assessed on. Then within that package of materials that UCL have given you, there is an actual mark scheme. So see if it matches up. And I reckon you'll get at least 90% of that mark scheme right. So have a go at doing that for just one question from your case study. Have a go at doing the activity that I've just done, and you'll get these slides and the video so that you can go back through it. So I'm going to talk to you now about how you're assessed. There are 2 different and interrelated assessment areas here. You are assessed on a score of 3 for every question. So your total marks for the questions are a total mark of 3 for each question, which is 15 overall. But then there is this JAR adjustment. I'm going to do this in a little bit more detail. But as you see there, the assessors will add or subtract up to 2 marks to and from your initial score. And the JAR adjustment is about trying to make sure that we are not highly rewarding generic answers. We need to make sure they are tied to the case study and that they are tied to the learning from the MPQ course that you've done. So we have these questions that we have to ask, and it will automatically adjust our marks according to that JAR assessment. We're going to do this in a little bit more detail. You'll notice here that I've just put a blank on the pass mark because this is going to change for your case study because there's been an adjustment in the way the pass mark is going to be determined. And I'll come on to that later on. So this is what the summative assessment will look like. The template that you fill in. So you'll put your name, your teacher reference number, read the case study, do all of your work on the pages that follow, and make sure you put your word count in for all questions plus a total word count. So your maximum is 500. It says there a minimum of 300 words per question, but I can assure you that answers that are around the 300 mark are not going to score very well. Make best use of all of the words available to you. So the JAR marking then, we're going to do a bit of work on this. I'm going to ask you to read an example in a minute. But the JAR marking is about justified application of learning and realistic. So what that means is your response must refer to some elements of the case study very specifically. So it's not enough to just say the name of the school. You need to draw on some data, or you need to draw on something from the Ofsted report in order to frame your answer. Your response must include at least one element per question that's obviously been learnt during your programme. Now, we have suggested repetition of a quote, but you need to be really careful about that. You don't want them to be more than a few words, and I mean a few words. I'll show you an example of this later. Reference to research is a much better thing. So reference to EEF guidance reports, for example, and the EEF guidance reports are your friend in this. So if one of the questions is about SEND, then the SEND in mainstream guidance report is really useful. If the question is about assessment and feedback, the feedback guidance report is useful. Obviously, PD will be useful for PD. Implementation planning will be useful for your 2 implementation questions. So you can draw on those, but there are other things that you can draw on as well from your course. And your response must be a realistic solution. So there's no point in saying things like, in this primary school, in order to solve this problem, I need to employ 5 more teaching assistants, when the school clearly is in a deficit budget and couldn't afford those teaching assistants. So you've got to make sure that what you're proposing is realistic for this particular school. So I'm just going to pause. I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to read through this example, and then we are going to unpick it in relation to the question. So just a couple of minutes for you to read that. Okay. So you'll see the question I've chosen here is question 4, which is implementation planning. The domain statement to be assessed is preparing appropriately for the changes to come. Now, this is quite a tricky question if you don't read it properly. So how would you, as the new head teacher, prepare appropriately for the changes to come? And there have been, this one has tripped people up before, so I'm just going to go through this in a little bit more detail. So you'll see here, there's been a very similar question on MPQ leading teaching and MPQH. And it tripped people up on both occasions. So we're thinking here about the domain statement about changes to come, and how would you prepare, especially in Key Stage 4, and it was the same question in leading teaching. And then you've got these, what will become must statements. So a lot of people really missed out on these statements and didn't answer the question in the right way. So you need to make sure with a question like this, you read these, and it's about effective planning, collective ownership and understanding based on the staff readiness to make the changes, and how these changes will be communicated and well resourced adequately. A lot of people saw this as a kind of delivery question about how they would deliver training to staff, rather than thinking before that how they would develop the change collectively and how they would communicate this and make sure it was resourced adequately. So actually what you're thinking about is these things as part of the answer. How do I develop collective ownership and understanding of the change to come? How do I make sure staff are ready to make the changes planned? That might involve PD, but that would only be a small part of your answer, not the whole thing. And how do I communicate and resource appropriately? So that was a question that tripped people up a bit. But what I want you to think about particularly now is when we're looking at this JAR assessment, as assessors, we get 2 questions and we answer yes or no to each of them. Does the answer relate specifically to the case study, and are the answers justified? And I answer yes or no, and the algorithm turns it into a 1 or a 0. Does the participant apply learning from their MPQ programme by applying relevant research, frameworks on tools? And again, I answer yes or no. So just thinking about that question, have a quick skim again. You've read it already. Just maybe write down and commit yourself to an answer. Would you answer yes or no to those 2 questions? So I'll put the 2 questions up. Does it relate to the case study, and are the answers justified? Would you say yes or no? And does it apply learning from the programme? Would you say yes or no? Commit yourself to an answer. It doesn't have to go in the Q&A, but just commit yourself to an answer. Okay. So for this particular example, it would have been a no for does the evidence relate specifically to the case study, and are the answers justified? It's vague. This is an answer that could apply to any school. It's not targeted to the information that they were given in the Grant Hill Academy, a Grant Hill case study. So things like I'd communicate with these stakeholders, I'd set the scene. They're not wrong, but they're not drawing on anything from the case study that would tell them what they might need to think about, whether there had been initiative overload, for example. So it might be that the case study talks about staff saying we just, there's initiative after initiative, nothing ever sticks, it increases our workload, and you would respond to that as part of your answer relating to this. So with the Grant Hill example, which you've got on UCL Extend, you'd need to think about what are the changes that I'm trying to create this communication about. And in this particular example, it was about consistency in schemes of learning and sequencing. That was the thing that needed to be addressed as a change, or feedback could have been used as an example, and the way they were giving and getting students to respond to feedback. So you could have picked either of those as a hook for this answer, and this one doesn't. So it's a no. Does the participant apply learning from their programme? Just about, yes. It talks about Kotter's 8-step model and how it's used to create, enable and implement the change, and then how they might use that model in benefiting from transparency. So it does do it a little bit better than its first question. So it would score a 0 for the first question I have to ask, and a 1 for the second question that I have to ask. And I'm just going to show you a video of how that works so you can see how it changes the marks. So you can see here, here's the questions. I pick a drop down. I might choose yes, and I might choose no. And you can see here how it changes the answer. Okay, so it gives it a 1 for a yes and a 0 for a no. And for that question, overall, it's got a 1. And this can be a bit kind of make or break on your answer. So it can either add a mark or 2 marks in the end, or it can take it away. And that's explained on the mark sheet for you. In terms of the overall pass mark. I'm just going to address this first because it has changed for this particular cohort. So for the first 10 assessment windows that we've done since this started in about 2020, I think it was, and I've been assessing right from the beginning, 10 marks was the pass mark. It was fixed at 10 marks. So the marking has evolved since in response to moderation feedback. So as the answers have been moderated externally, what they've noticed is that standards have changed, and it means that there's been a shift in the number of people passing. So after this really thorough review, we need to make sure that it's fair and there's parity to the previous 10 assessment windows. So we've now got a process of comparing the case studies submitted in a window to those that passed in a previous window to maintain a consistent pass standard. So, for example, if we were reading a response that was 9 marks, we would go to previous answers that were 9 marks and say, well, that wouldn't have passed in a previous window. Is this 9 marks better than those 9 marks? And if it is, it might mean that the pass mark drops to 9 for this window, and vice versa. Those of you that work with coursework on Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 will understand this process. It's the same process for coursework that we get in subjects like mine in English Language A level. It's exactly the same thing. We don't know what students need to achieve in order to pass because that fluctuates based on moderation. So what we know is the pass mark will vary, but the quality of submission will not. So what I'm trying to do is give you some tips for how you make sure that yours is going to hit some really high level marks so that you're getting at least 2 for each of your answers, if not 3 for most of them, and how you can add on these extra 2 JAR marks to boost your score even further. So if I just show you JAR in total, so these are the questions that you're being assessed on. And then these are the scores that this candidate scored for the answer to the question. So mostly 2s and 1 3. They would have scored 11. In their justified and realistic and evidence of learning from the course, I've been able to answer yes for all of them. So they've scored a 1 for everything, a 10 overall, and it makes this JAR adjustment of 2 marks. So actually in total, they've scored 13. Now, I think as 13 would likely be a pass, a secure pass. So we need to make sure we're adding on those marks as much as possible. You can see that here, this candidate has scored mostly 2s and a 1. It's a 9. And for their JARs, they've got some 0s, which has impacted on their JAR adjustment score. They've given it 1. So it would score 10. So depending on the moderation process, 10 could be a pass, 9 could be a pass, 11 could be a pass. We're in a bit of a danger zone with this one. We want to make sure we're not in a danger zone with it. And here is an example where somebody's done that's been justified and realistic. So they've been referring to the case study, but there's no evidence of learning from the course. It's almost like they've not done the MPQ course. So their score for JAR is just a 0. So they're not taking anything away, but they're not adding it. And again, they're in a bit of a danger zone here because it's 8 marks. And depending on the quality, we don't know where that pass is. It might not be at an 8. So we need to make sure that we put you in the best possible position. And that's by making sure you score 1s for is it justified and realistic? And is there evidence of your prior learning? And when you get your responses back, this is what will be on the front. But when you go to the case study examples, you'll see this in the sample mark book. So I'm just trying to explain to you what all of this means in that sample mark book that you can access. So if I just show you here, you can come back to this video. If we look at this response, this is the mark scheme down here. You can see how if I've unpicked it, they're the things that I would have come up with. And I've just labelled where I think they are covering each of these statements. So if I just show you those in all of those labels, when you come back to this video and these slides, you can have a look at where I think it's met each of those criteria. What I think it's missed is this one, time and care spent resourcing the desired changes. So it could lose some marks there. It might end up with 0 for that question. So this is an NPQSL example. It doesn't matter which course you're doing, and it doesn't matter that you've not seen the case study. Just have a read of the question. So this one is about ensuring teaching across the school stimulates pupil thinking and understanding. It's in the domain about teaching. She's got to cover actions that stimulate pupil thinking, cognition, metacognition, and independent learning, and how you develop the skills of plan, monitor, and evaluate in pupil work. So have a read of that, and we'll do the same jar thing again, and then I'll talk through this one as a response. Okay, somebody asked for a little bit more reading time, so I'm hoping that will be enough, but you can come back to these. So if we're thinking, is this justified and realistic? So does it refer to the case study specifically, and is it a realistic suggestion? And it's absolutely a strong yes on this, isn't it, in comparison to the other? So what we can see here, he or she in their answer refers to good practice in Key Stage 1. Natalie, who's the protagonist in this question, has done research to get strengths and weaknesses. There's been an inset day. They've had some math suggestions like silent modelling. So she's really, or he is really drawing on that case study to pull out things that are relevant to this question that have happened already and might need development. We've then got things like, is there application of prior learning? Absolutely yes. The EEF metacognition guidance report, the participant doesn't quote. So remember I talked about quotes, put things into your own words. So the guidance report recommends think alouds for modelling to articulate metacognitive processes. So don't quote the guidance report, because I would say that takes about 60 words to do and you haven't got enough words. Put it into your own words and then weave it into your answer. This candidate has also woven in their own experience of leading on metacognition. And then down here, another example of learning from the course is about Fullen's change model. And then we've got examples down here going back to the case study, again, referring to data like 80% of the children weren't able to talk about strategies that help them. That this participant has then pulled out recommendation 2 specifically of the metacognition guidance report to help respond to that. So you can see this is a much better answer where everything's really woven in. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that you're aiming for. And again, I've just pulled out from the question what I think might be in my plan and how this participant has then put all of these ideas into different paragraphs or different sentences within their response. So again, you'll get time when you come back to this video or come back to these slides to have a look at that. So thinking about a good response, you need to make sure you are reflective about your own leadership development, that you use good examples from your own school in framing this and talk about your role within that. So don't talk about how the head teacher led on it. What was your role within that? Think about how the content of the NPQ applies to the scenario that you've been given, and try and put yourself in the shoes of the leader in that scenario. So in the last one, it was about Natalie, who was a leader and she was going to lead on metacognition. Put yourself into those shoes because they might be in a very contrasting setting. So try and think of it from their point of view. What I usually say is imagine that person in front of you and imagine you are their mentor and this is about you giving them some advice. What would you say to them that's very specific, that draws on evidence? What is it that you'd say to them? And I'm just going to give you another example of why you really need to unpick these questions really carefully. So this example, this one was specifically from a specialist course, but the same question has been asked in a leadership question as well. I think it might have been NPQH. So how best could Ahmed Khan develop the practice of non-specialist geography teachers by ensuring the right choices are made on what to implement? And what quite a lot of people did was focus on this bit of the question. And they went down the route of developing the subject knowledge and the practice of those non-specialist geography teachers. And they turned it into a professional development question. They missed that it was about ensuring the right choices are made on what to implement. So before you even start training people, what is it that we need to focus on, and how do I know I'm making the right choices on what changes to make? And then the big clue was in the must statements at the end. And I've no doubt that people will still ignore them, even though they're now going to say your response must consider. So what it talks about is you have to make evidence-based choices based on accurate diagnosis of the problem with a credible interpretation of your data. So actually what this was about was looking at your data, that might be numerical or qualitative data, and thinking about what it was telling you about the most important thing that needed to change. That you diagnose that, and then you look at the evidence and look at what the evidence suggests you might change. And that was about data focused on pupil knowledge and understanding. So read the questions very, very carefully. And you can see there, that was the mark scheme at the time. It was more about data than it was about professional development. So using that example, because it has been an NPQH example as well, I just want you to think about the dangers of AI. A lot of us are using AI now. I use it to help me think about things that might go in policies, for example. But with the NPQ assessment, there is a real danger zone with it, particularly if you've never used AI before. I would not recommend starting with this assessment. So I used that question that I've just shown you, where people made lots of mistakes with it. I thought, well, I'll see what AI does with this. So I gave it this instruction, which was to write a 250-word response, because this was for a specialist course, that answers the question, how best could Ahmed Khan, etc. And I gave it the question that was given to these participants. And this is what it produced. Just have a skim read. You don't need to read this one in detail, but just have a skim read and think about your thoughts about this, and I'll show you what I think the problems with it are. Okay, so these are the problems. It misunderstands the question focus, and it wouldn't meet the criteria on the mark scheme. So in the same way that the candidates assumed it was a professional development question, that's what it picks out. It really focuses on like the development of people more than specific things to do with data analysis. There are some American spellings and vocabulary in there. We don't tend to use the word educators, we say teachers. So that alerts me to this potentially being an AI response. Because as assessors, we are looking for that, because it has to be yours, because otherwise that's plagiarism, because you've taken it from AI. There's loads of generic statements, and AI really uptalks things as well. So you'll see things in it like the collaborative effort will ensure that the chosen strategies align with the overall goals. It doesn't even say what that actually means. What do they mean by that? I'm going to draw your attention to this example here, because this is one of the best ones, I think. To ensure the right choices are made, Ahmed can foster collaborative decision making. He can talk to teachers about their preferences, comfort levels. He should leverage expertise. And I think it says somewhere that you should maybe send them on some training courses. And it's a bit like, if he was sat in front of me now and all I said was, make sure you leverage some collaborative decision-making processes, I think I might have been a bit like, what do you mean by that and how do I do it? So imagine being very specific about something that you can do with this school. And then the other thing it does is it tries too hard. So it says it wants to elevate the practice of those teachers. I mean, why not just improve? It says conduct a comprehensive assessment. Well, comprehensive is a waste of words. Conduct an assessment is enough for me. You know, what does comprehensive even mean? So that was a problem. And then I thought, I've not been very fair because I didn't include those must statements. So this time I included them, and I just want you to read this, that it's focused on now. So again, you can see here, it misinterprets the question. It's not talking about evidence-based choices, diagnosing the problem, credible interpretation, data focused on pupil knowledge and understanding. And you can see here, you know, if Ahmed was sat in front of me and I said, in order to make the right choices, research some, get some research-backed teaching methodologies, do some professional development conferences and read some literature about best practices, that is not helpful at all. So it needs to be something much more specific. So it still misunderstands the question. It's wordy, it's vague, it's got no substance. I could give this question to any middle leader and say, write me an answer, and that's what they produce. It wouldn't meet the JAR requirements because it's not justified and realistic, and it's not linked to learning from the course. And we will run some submissions through an AI checker if we're suspicious of them, and we will refer them to our team leaders who will also check them. And when I run that one through an AI checker, it tells me it is highly confident that it was AI generated, and it was. So do's and don'ts. Don't use AI to generate, do use it to generate thoughts and perspectives for you to reflect on. That's fine, but don't copy any script or text produced by AI, even spelling or grammar checkers. Don't think that AI platforms will produce a better script than you can produce yourself, because in my experience, they can't. I can, more often than not, I think, tell which is AI because they are very vague and generic. And don't use it to generate a script without practice and experience. If you've never used AI before, don't start doing it now, because it won't be able to answer the question. It can't draw on all the case study information well enough. So just to summarise in for the purposes of marking, make sure you pay attention to the learn that and learn how to statements. Make sure that what you propose is relevant and justified and links to the case study, and make sure you are drawing on your learning from the MPQ programme. So they're the three things that you need to do. And just to remind you how to find the learn how to statements, they're at the beginning of this presentation, but I'll just remind you again, on the front page of your case study, you've got that box. Look in the left-hand column first that says the domain and the number. Ignore the letter, then read the domain statement on the right-hand column. It's in bold. Find that same bold statement in the MPQ framework and look at the sub-statement, subsections underneath that as to what to cover in your answer. Then also read the question and the bit that says your response must consider, because that might point you to specific subsections that you need to address. So the overall framework statement might say something about thinking about parents, colleagues and governors, let's say, but the actual case study question might just say focusing on parents. So you don't need to talk about governors and other stakeholders. So it might narrow it down even further for you. So my top tips are: learn from other leaders, go and talk to them. Your submission is your thinking, so don't quote too much, put it in your own words. So no more than 5% should be quotes. So for your submission of 2,500 words, that's only 125 words across all 5 questions. So be careful about quoting. You don't need to write in an academic style. This is a professional response. It needs professional writing. You need to write in prose. Don't use bullet points, because it needs to be prose and sentences. Those that I've seen that are written in bullet points don't score very well. Don't copy standard statements from the MPQ framework. So you don't need to copy the assessment statements, and don't copy chunks of material from MPQ content or EF guidance reports or case studies. And make sure you're being realistic and you don't give generic advice. I'm just going to show you the difference between generic and focused on the in a minute. So no more than 5% should be quotes. So I think I said, sorry, for 2,500 words, that was 125 words. So don't quote too much. And also an AI generated script, if you copy and paste that, that's classed as quoting. And if you went over 125 words from AI, that would be plagiarism. So again, be really careful. So this is what 60 quoted words would look like. So if you imagine this is one question, you've got 125, that's 60 quoted words. It's too much. So just have a quick read of that. So if you quoted that much in every question, you'd be going over the 5% and you'd tip into plagiarism. Even if you cited where that had come from. And you'll notice in all the examples I've given you, I've not given any citations at all. You don't need to do that, but this is far too many words. So, you know, you might start with Sam must recognise that, but then put this into your own words. And then the difference between generic and targeted, I've given you an example here where a generic response would be, Sam needs to create a culture of high expectations and be consistent in modelling his expectations to staff who may not be confident with behaviour management. Imagine Sam is sat in front of me saying, how do I create a culture of high expectations? If I, as his mentor, said, be consistent in modelling for those that aren't confident in behaviour management, what does that send him away with? That doesn't give him any help at all. So think specifically about the evidence that you draw on and the advice that you'd give. So I'll give you a minute to read that improved paragraph. Okay, so you can see here, I've not put EEF or Education Endowment Foundation. In fact, never write Education Endowment Foundation, always write EEF because you've got them one word instead of three. I've not said the entire title of the Improving Behaviour in Schools report. I've just condensed everything down. But you can see here, to create a culture of high expectations, I give Sam some examples: deliver the non-negotiables, and to create that welcoming, safe environment. I've given him idea about scripted phrases to use, and then how that might help drive those standards up. So I've referred to the guidance report and I've given him some examples. It's much more concrete and much less generic. So you want to make sure it's really tight so that you can hit that jar and you can make sure it's actionable suggestions. And then just to prove a point about AI, this is the response that you've just been looking at that I wrote. I've fed it into AI and it thinks I am 95% human, which, given I've got 2 hip replacements, is probably true. 95% human, 5% probability it's AI generated. And I think that's because I'm quoting, or not quite quoting, an EEF guidance report there. So it is possible. It's not foolproof, but it does give us a suspicion that we might need to pass on. So practice with your case studies. Review the case study and the scenario that you can get on UCL Extend. Read and unpick those assessment questions in the way that I've done at the start. Select one question that you think is the most challenging. Do a bullet point list of things that you'd include. Don't do that in your real thing. This is just an idea of planning. Have a go at writing it if you have time, but if you haven't, at least have a go at planning. And then go to the sample response and the sample mark scheme and see where that response is on the mark scheme and what you think yours is like in comparison, and maybe do a bit of self-marking on it. So that's what I would do in preparation for the assessment going live. These are the things that can go wrong, so you need to make sure you're being careful. We have seen people upload blank documents that they have uploaded the wrong version. So it might be that they've done a practice case study and they've uploaded that by mistake. So make sure you keep things separate. That they have lost internet connection at a vital time. So if I give you an example here at my college, it wasn't on an assessment day, thankfully, but we had a complete outage where we had to shut the entire building. We didn't have anything. So just make sure you give yourself a buffer. You know, if that happened at 9 o'clock in the morning, at least you might be able to get off site and get Wi-Fi access somewhere else to upload it. People have not been able to work the upload page because they've not practiced the download and upload before it's gone live. And we have had an example, just one example, I think, where somebody got a practice case study, answered the questions on the practice case study and uploaded them by mistake. So they worked on the exemplar rather than the correct one. So please make sure you keep all of those in separate folders and you don't muddle things up. So my final summary is, don't ignore the learn that and learn how to statements. Don't write generically, academically or theoretically. You're not doing a master's, you're doing a professional assessment. Don't describe or repeat the case study. So avoid trying to summarize the case study in your first paragraph. You've got to pick out things and blend them in. Don't go above 5%. So don't go above 125 words, basically, on quoting. Don't make lots of academic references. Don't work with somebody that's on your cohort. Don't copy. Don't exceed the overall word limit, and don't go over that noon time. And then my final thing is, this is an old one, but it looks exactly the same for your cohort. On UCL Extend, you have got this document. This is your absolute Bible for your assessment. Print it out and store it. If you store it electronically, all of these things are hyperlinked. It's got all of your information in there that you're going to need. And if you print it out, you've just got it in front of you all the time. So for me, that is the most important document. So I am going to finish there, but what I am going to do is just show you UCL Extend and where you'll find the assessment. So I'm just going to, this is an old one. I'm just going to pick MPQH again. So when you go into it, you'll see your assessment. Oh, sorry, Andy. Am I all right to carry on? I'm going to carry on.
Yeah, that wasn't me.
Oh, right. Okay. So you'll see an assessment tab. Click on the assessment tab. When you scroll down, you've got help videos there. The participant guide is the guide that I've just shown you, the one that's hyperlinked. So that opens up as a PDF. You've then got exemplar case study. So this is the really important folder. If you click on that, you'll see the case study, the task and the case study there. You'll see an exemplar submission and you'll see the results and their feedback. So if I click on that one, for example, and it downloads it, you'll see this is the JAR assessment and the overall assessment that I'm talking about. And you'll be able to see for every question what they've got. So it got no's for its JAR, it's got 2 marks, 1 mark, the overall assessment of it for that question, and the overall assessment for the whole thing. So that is the folder that you really need to look at. So I'll stop now so that we've got any time for any other questions that you need addressing. And Andy might want to say something and Steve might want to say something as well.
I'm not going to add anything on top of what you've said, Louise. Thank you for a very comprehensive review. What I would say to colleagues that are putting things in the chat and everyone on the call as well is, I would say, do not forget that there is a suite of videos from MPQ Online that give you very detailed insight into the assessment process. This video that Louise has provided will be made available on Extend shortly. If you haven't read the assessment handbook or had a look at the exemplar case studies that Louise is showing online, I would suggest you do that now. Other than that, I would say thank you for your time this evening, and we wish you all the best for your assessment.